Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our latest episode of the Utopias podcast. This is a very, very interesting conversation that I had the privilege of having with a prominent Afghan journalist. So, from the nation of Afghanistan. His name is Habib Khan. He's quite an interesting character. In fact, I was told that he had the only bar in Kabul, which is the capital city of Afghanistan, at the time of the reign of the Taliban and even sort of afterward, which of course the Taliban is now back in power in Afghanistan. Habib works with the Wall Street Journal. He's an independent journalist as well. He's reported on the Afghan conflict for more than a decade. And he was one of the few journalists who was not only embedded with Afghan government forces, but also the Taliban, who he was abducted by. He's known as one of the most courageous journalists in Afghanistan and from the Afghan diaspora, and is a very, very interesting character. And so this is a conversation about Afghanistan, which is, actually, even though it's very far away from, where many of our listeners live, where many of you live, it's actually a critical nation in terms of understanding global geopolitics, understanding the United States and its so-called war on terror, and understanding Afghanistan, which has been referred to as Central Asian nation, extremely beautiful and extremely diverse, referred to as the graveyard of empires. So this is a very fun conversation. It was recorded less than 3 years ago, but in late 2023. And we were waiting on this for the right time to put it out, and now really feels that time. So everybody enjoy this. As always, we're a non-commercial labor of love effort. So please rate, review, subscribe, and share this podcast with everybody and anybody so we can stay alive and we can keep reaching all of you. Everybody enjoy this conversation. Habib Khan here today on Utopias. Okay, fantastic. I'm so grateful to welcome Habib Khan to the Utopias podcast. Habib's a wonderful guy, a friend of mutual friends, but also a colleague in the field of journalism, in the field, I believe, also cares deeply about human rights and democracy, and has been a witness to some major transformations that have occurred around the world, and specifically in his home country of Afghanistan. So really grateful for you to join us today, and thank you for making it happen.
Thank you so much, Ramesh and Phoebe. I'm honored to be part of this podcast, and so I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. And you have an incredible story, right? I know that you were born and grew up and spent time in Afghanistan, which is a remarkably beautiful and biodiverse, culturally diverse nation that, of course, is not really known for such because of the tendencies of Western journalism and sort of the kind of global discourses around military and terror and security and the Taliban and all of these things. But I know when we met, which is, I want to ask you about how you came to Mexico City, which is where we're actually speaking to you from. When we met physically in Mexico City, you told me some remarkable stories from being kidnapped by the Taliban to having the only bar, I believe, in Kabul. So let's just start by asking you I want to ask you a little bit about your own story, like your own personal story, your own background, your inspirations growing up and the kind of work that you did and do now.
Yeah, thank you, Ramesh. So I grew up in the countryside, so I spent my teenage years in the rural areas, and then my family moved to Kabul when I was about 15. So I spent my life in both in the countryside and also in the city, growing up. And as a kid, as a teenager, I used to go to a madrasa, a religious school. And my both my grandfathers were religious scholars. So for obvious reason, my father also wanted me to be a mullah or a qari, a person who memorizes Quran by heart. So I did memorize some of it, but then I told my father, you know what, I don't want to go to religious school anymore. I want to go to the regular school. So I started going to the regular school, and then when my family moved to Kabul, I got my first internship after high school at a local Afghan newspaper. It was called Afghanistan Times. So I worked for them for about 3 years, and then I started working for other media outlets and other media organization as a freelancer, and then I landed at the Wall Street Journal. So I worked for the Wall Street Journal from 2010 up until 2018 as a one-source correspondent, and during those years I traveled extensively all over the country, reporting on mainly on security. For obvious reason, one of the topic that the editors in the international newspapers they were most interested in was obviously security. So since then, I've been reporting since 2007. I've been involved in Afghanistan, reporting on various issues from human rights to security to the Taliban to other armed groups and to the insurgencies that we witnessed how the Taliban regrouped in the post-2001 scenario and how they climbed back to power in 2021, which was a surprise for so many of us because none of us believed that this will happen, but it did. And then we see the Taliban again in control of the country. So we saw that all of that, we witnessed all of that. I, as part of the Afghan media community, reported on it extensively. And growing up, obviously, Afghanistan, for many people, it's as many people know, it's a very diverse country. At the meantime, it's a very conservative country. And I grew up, my family was very religious. My surroundings were very religious, but I ended up being agnostic too. And the inspiration, what caused that was, it wasn't a process that happened overnight. It happened, it took years for me to change my belief system, and the inspiration for that, there were so many inspirations, but on the local level, on the Afghanistan's level, there's this poet, his name is Rumi Khan, so I used to read his poetry, and he's one of the renowned contemporary poet of Pashto language, and he's very philosophical, and I was reading his work as a teenager, and then when I grew up, I made a little bit of sense of his work because he's encouraging everybody to question everything. And I think that made me sort of choose journalism as a career too, because I was curious about things. I wanted to make sense of why things are happening the way they are happening. So that, and also when I started reading about religion and society, things like that, I got familiar with Richard Dawkins, Tim Harris, obviously Stephen Hawking and Thomas Henry, and those people sort of made me to become who I am today in terms of beliefs. And yeah, I was obviously working as you mentioned, as journalist in Afghanistan, but at the meantime, I was an entrepreneur too. So I had a few businesses, a couple of restaurants. I had one restaurant that was ironically Mexican restaurant. I never knew that I'll end up living in Mexico.
Mexican restaurant in Kabul.
Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, it was Mexican restaurant. It was sort of in the green zone of Kabul. So it was surrounded by all these foreign offices, like the Canadian Embassy was just next door to us, the World Bank, Canadian Embassy, and then the US embassies. And all these embassies were located in this area, diplomatic enclave of Kabul, which they call Green Zone. So I had one restaurant there, and it was also a bar too. So on the weekends we'll have parties there. But then I also had another restaurant, which was the first ever steak house in Kabul. So that was the second business I had. And apart from that, I had some other little businesses too. So at one point, I was providing work to about 60 people in Kabul. But then it all came to an end after, unfortunately, we witnessed what happened to the country. And beside all that, I founded this organization that I still am the president and I still run it. It's called Afghan Peace Watch. So it's a research organization. We do media reporting and research on security, human rights, women's rights, and other strategic development. We're profiling armed groups. We do research on the illicit weapon smuggling. We right now have a research paper that we are about to publish next month is about the Islamic State Khorasan province. So that's the kind of work we do with this organization, because when the Taliban came to power again in Afghanistan, most of the media houses that existed in Afghanistan, especially the Afghan media organization, they collapsed due to funding issues and also due to censorship, strict censorship from the Taliban. So we came up with a really unique methodology and to keep reporting on Afghanistan and from Afghanistan. And we are not in a manner that we are not exposed to Taliban censorship. So we still, our team is still in Afghanistan. Some of our team is in Afghanistan. The rest of us is all over the world in different countries. And we still collect data from Afghanistan and offer analysis and research reports.
It's so interesting to hear about that. Everybody should really check out Afghan Peace Watch to really get a sense from actually Afghan people, Afghan journalists, about what really the issues are in Afghanistan, not just issues in a sort of negative sense, but all the possibilities as well. And one thing I want to share with our audience is I've had the opportunity to befriend a number of Afghani people, both in India, in the United States. My friend Habib Khan now, who we're talking to right now in Mexico City, sort of like I want to ask you about how you ended up there. And Afghani people, as you know, are amongst the kindest, most generous, most hospitable people in the entire world. Far from merely describing Afghanistan as a nation, we're talking about one of the most beautiful places in terms of natural beauty of the world. The rooftop of the Himalayas, or the source of the Himalayas, is found in Afghanistan and neighboring Tajikistan in Central Asia, which I've had the opportunity to visit. So if you want to talk about the tallest, most spectacular, most sacred, in a sense, mountains on the planet for many people, we're talking about Afghanistan. When we're talking about Afghani music, so we have the great Ahmad Zahir, who is sounds a lot like old Bollywood music in India. I grew up with a lot of old Indian film music, which I know a lot of my Afghani friends did as well. The Ahmad Zahir's music is spellbinding for anyone who wants to check it out. And Afghanistan features people from many different, if you will, ethnicities, far from calling someone just an Afghan. It's just like calling someone an American. There are lots of different languages. There are people who speak languages that are very similar to Farsi, which is spoken in Iran. There are people who speak Urdu, or versions of Urdu, dialects of Urdu, which is often spoken in parts of North India and Pakistan. There's other languages like Pashto, for example. So we're actually talking about a remarkable diversity of people and environments and cultures and music. But I do know that of course, most of the Western media and most of the global media tends to focus on Afghanistan as a place of risk, a place of insecurity. Of course, this is all, it's funny that is done, that is what they do, given that those conditions in many ways exist because of what the West, and before that, the Soviet Union, did in their actions to Afghanistan. My opinion is not yours necessarily. So I want to just ask you about that. This sort of discourse globally that treats Afghanistan and Afghani people as sort of like, war-stricken, terror-stricken, helpless, sometimes even more racist, honestly, rather than recognizing how this has been a place that has been trespassed upon and violated by colonial and empire regimes. That's my take on this, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah, but before that, let me make a comment that a lot of people confuse this. So Afghani is the currency of Afghanistan, and the people of Afghanistan, they're called Afghan.
I just learned that. Thank you.
Yeah. So a lot of people make that mistake. The currency is Afghani, but the people are called Afghan. So, yeah, if you look at the way the Hollywood movies or Bollywood movies or the pop culture, Afghanistan has always been associated with violence and like war and fighting, and nobody has looked at the other side of the country. I had this one project in mind, but unfortunately, I didn't materialize it due to what happened in the country. Was to sort of focus on the unseen aspect of Afghanistan. As you mentioned before, like the landscape is amazing in the country. We have deserts like in Arabia. We have mountainous region, the Hindu Kush mountainous region. And we have the forest there, and then we have snow, and also there are places that are very hot, and places that are extremely cold. So we have all the four seasons in Afghanistan, and we have the mountainous terrain, we have the desert, we have the forest, and when it comes to biodiversity too, we have the snow leopard in Afghanistan that do not exist in many parts of the country, only in a few countries. And one of those countries is Afghanistan. So a lot more than violence. When it comes to music, we have Ahmad Zohar. Apart from Ahmad Zohar, we have Farhad Darya, we have Ustad Nashnas, we have Ustad Sarahang. These are the people I don't know if you've heard about Ustad
We'll get all of those names from you and put them in the description when we put this out. This will be great.
Yeah, so in music, we have beautiful music, and when it comes to the Afghan dresses, they're the most colorful dresses, especially for men too, but especially for women. And every ethnicity has their own color schemes that they use in their dresses, especially for the women. So we have a lot more than justified, but it's also that people of my age, I'm 36 now, they know nothing apart from war. And we listen to the stories of our elders, and when they talk how Afghanistan was during the 80s, how Afghanistan was during the 70s. You could just pick a car and you could travel all across the country wearing whatever you wanted to wear, and there was nobody to stop you to tell you why are you wearing certain clothes, why are you dressed certain way. Our people were very progressive, but they've been radicalized during the decades of war against the Soviets, and then afterward against the United States. During the war against the Soviets, it all started there. Millions of Afghans were radicalized, so they fuel this war machine to fight up the Soviet Union. And that radicalization of people, it was partly supported and financed by the United States too. They created in Pakistan was one of the main sponsor and main enabler of these radical movements during the 80s and the 70s that we are seeing the consequences of now. There are 40,000 madrasas that were created in Pakistan to radicalize a whole generation, not one generation, actually this is the third generation, the youngster now. They are the third generation that being radicalized. So from my father's generation, then my generation, and then the next generation, they have been systematically radicalized. If you go to, like I hear the story from my mother, we are from the southeastern part of the country, and the province I'm from is called Paktia. And unfortunately, my province is now known for the Haqqanis, because the Haqqani network is also from there. But my people and the province where I'm from, the people were not radicalized, were not religious fanatic like they are today. So my mother tells me that in her when she was a young girl, at that time, she saw this one lady wearing burqa, like the blue or like the yellow burqas that you see. No, it's not a headscarf. It's a burqa, like it covers everything. So it was, nobody knew what burqa was, and this is from my mother's days. My mother is like around 17. So she was telling me when she was a kid, the first time she saw a woman that was wearing burqa, and everybody, all the kids in the village, were just like looking at the woman and making fun of her and saying, "Oh, look, a bottle is walking," because nobody had the idea what burqa was. So these were like these concept of burqa and this concept of radical Islamic, all imported to Afghanistan during the past like 4 decades of radicalization. So there's a lot more to the country. There's a lot more to Afghanistan. And also one more thing is that every Afghan literally grew up with Bollywood. So Bollywood is so famous in Afghanistan. I think Bollywood is more famous in Afghanistan than it is in South India.
Definitely. Bollywood is the music, the film music from Mumbai, from Bombay. But of course, there are many other film industries now in India, including in South India. And many of us South Indians are often more into our own film music than Bollywood, because we see Bollywood as like a northern invasion in a way of, not exactly, but of our own culture. But yeah, you're right.
I'm learning a little bit about this North Indian, South Indian paradox, like a lot of people are talking about it. That why the North Indian are not speaking Tamil or Telugu or other languages.
That's my native language.
Tamil. Yeah. When they go to South India and the South, so I didn't know about it. I just learned about this discourse like a couple of years ago. And for me, the first time I met a South Indian diplomat at the Indian embassy in Kabul, and I was talking to him in Hindi, and he couldn't speak Hindi. I was surprised. I was like, wow. But then later, I found out not a lot of people speak Hindi in India.
But this is all a really good example of how what we call Afghanistan is a highly complex place with a lot of different histories, and some of, this so-called radicalization or the kind of intense way in which people have been, become more and more Islamist in a sense. I'm not saying that is an inherent negative on any level at all, but a lot of that is a response to colonial action or neo-colonial action, like the invasion of the Soviet Union, dating back 4 decades when this started to occur. Correct? Like late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
And some of this was actually funded by the United States, including the so-called Mujahideen, and which the Taliban were part of, which was the sort of freedom fighters. So in essence, Afghanistan being the object of American and Soviet geopolitics ended up in a way creating greater suffering for the Afghani people themselves. And a lot of what we see today when it comes to whether it's the Taliban or others is a function of these geopolitics. Afghanistan in reality is a hyper diverse country with lots of music, lots of food, lots of environments, and super cool people from everyone I've met. So it's interesting to sort of see that how, in a way, the chess games of global empires can end up afflicting so many people as well. Yet there's so much resilience and hope and creativity in Afghan people. Sorry, I corrected myself now. In Afghan people.
Thank you.
From like our friend Habib here being like you being not just a journalist, but like an entrepreneur doing this, doing that, even creating a steakhouse, or your parents. So
Yeah. So as a kid, I went to school, and in the first grade, when they teach you how to do math. So my math book was, and I studied that math book, like growing up and going to school. So my math book was 2 bullets, photos of 2 bullets, plus 2 bullets equals 4 bullets. And 5 guns minus 3 guns equals 2 guns, and with the photos. And do you know where those books were printed? Nebraska, funded by the United States.
And madrasas are
No, these were not madrasas. No, these were not madrasas. These were like the regular schools.
So the books were printed in the U.S. by which you all were having education in Afghanistan, and they were having you do arithmetic with pictures of bullets.
Bullets, guns, and also, for instance, my Pashto book. Pashto is the native language I speak. So the Pashto book was how they taught us how to learn alphabetics. Like Alep, we say it Alep, Be, Te, and in our language. So Alep was like Allah, Be is like Baba. Baba means like grandfather, right? And to use Baba in a sentence, it was like Baba goes to jihad. Goes to war to fight jihad against the infidels. And then for Te, it was for Te, that's another sound that we have in our language. It was Tupac. Tupac meaning gun. So like we used Tupac, and the use of that word in sentence was that we used Tupac to fight war against the infidels. And those are the books I studied growing up at school, not religious school, the regular school. And everybody of my age, if you ask any Afghan who's at my age, of my generation, they'll tell you the same thing. That's how a whole generation was radicalized. Like how can you tell like a kid of like 6 years, 7 years that he should do math using bullets or guns, or use alphabetics, using all those concepts. And what the Taliban are doing right now, so after the 2001 invasion, and after the Lower Jirga, the Grand Assembly was held in Kabul, and they made some reforms to the textbooks too. And they took all these things out and made the textbook a bit like they improved the quality of those textbooks. But what the Taliban are doing right now, they're reversing the curriculum again and adding all those things. So if you're a kid, you go to school and you're learning math, or you're learning Pashto, or you're learning other subjects, and you grow up with this, what will you be thinking about? All you'll be thinking about is like bullets and guns and killing infidels. And that's how they've radicalized generations after generation in the country. And this was partly because of the Soviets, partly because of the United States, partly mostly because of Pakistan. And because Pakistan is one of the main enabler of all this. Pakistan.
Yeah, and it's sort of that famous phrase, my enemy's enemy is my friend, until they're no longer my friend. And you have to take responsibility for your actions or your lack of awareness or understanding of these places. In a very different vein, when I used to spend time in Egypt, writing about the revolution there in the early 2011 to 2013, I actually met a number of U.S. State Department personnel who literally were told did not speak any Arabic, did not know almost anything about the Arab world or Egypt, and were actually actively encouraged by the State Department to not actually develop very close relationships with like local people and organizations, especially like activist organizations or human rights organizations, because then they would side more with the Egyptian people's vision rather than all necessarily the American vision. So I guess the other thing I want to ask you about before I go to talk to you about your life as a journalist and your own visions for the future, both personally as well as for Afghanistan. is about the Taliban itself. So, as we've discussed, you know, Afghanistan's actually a highly global, in a sense, society, in the sense that there are global influences on people, or at least international influences on many different communities there, just because culture is always changing and moving, right? I mean, absolutely. But, the Taliban themselves, their sort of interpretation of Islam is very influenced by Deobandi, who's an Indian, specifically from Rajasthan, Gujarat area, which is like northwest kind of India, middle west kind of India. So it's also it's an Indian Islamic cleric who influenced the Taliban, and so I guess I want to ask you about the Taliban and your own experiences with them personally. They're portrayed a certain way in the U.S. I think there are many clearly, obviously, sort of negative things that the Taliban have done and continue to do, but they are also an indigenous group from the region. Absolutely right. So I guess I want to ask you about that. Afghanistan being a place for people of many different ethnicities and different tribal groups, and the Taliban's rise to power. How did this happen? What are they like now? And tell us also about some of your own experiences, personally with the Taliban. You even mentioned to me that you were once kidnapped by the Taliban.
Yeah, I don't agree with this notion that Taliban are indigenous people
Okay.
that are fighting up. This was a narrative created by a number of international experts on Afghanistan. The right description for the Taliban would be that they were the product of Pakistani madrasas. They were people who were systematically trained in the religious madrasas, funded by the Saudis and funded by the Pakistanis in Pakistan, and they claim to power through that. The thinking that the Taliban right now have, that thinking is alien to Afghanistan. People in Afghanistan, they want to send their girls to school. They want to send their women to work and educate. We have had millions of girls, even in the most remote and the most conservative parts of the country, going to school. And the Taliban have banned that. That's not the thinking of the indigenous people of the country. That's the thinking that's being imported from Afghanistan. Because if you want to disable a society, you cut them in half, women are half of it, and then you deprive them of actively contributing to the society, and that will paralyze the society itself. So that's what the Taliban are doing. Obviously, when it comes to biologically, most of the Taliban, they are Afghans. They have the same genes as I do, most of them. But when it comes to their thinking, they've been brainwashed systematically in these madrasas. I mentioned before, there are 40,000 madrasas operating in Pakistan. And the problem is that a lot of people, and this has happened in the past and this will happen again, the United States abandoned Afghanistan in the 90s. When the Soviet Union, they were defeated in Afghanistan, the United States were, okay, we're done. We accomplished our goal in Afghanistan. And then there was a mess that was created by these very so-called freedom fighters that the United States financed and sponsored for many years in Afghanistan. And then there was the civil war in Kabul that killed tens of thousands of people. And Afghanistan descended into chaos in the 90s. And then what happened, the consequences of that completely marginalizing Afghanistan, completely ignoring Afghanistan, what was happening there, the consequences was the 9/11. And now that's happening again. The United States, the Biden administration thinks that they're out of Afghanistan and they want to do nothing with Afghanistan. But we know, as a person growing up there, knowing the mentality of these people who are in power right now, they believe in jihad. They believe in global jihad. They believe that they defeated the Crusaders. They believe that there's no other power. If they defeated the Americans, there's no other power that can hold them back or that can defeat them. So they believe to spread to spread this over this thinking of jihad to other regional countries and to the world countries. And I'll give you an example. I was watching a documentary yesterday about Al-Shabaab. And if you look at Al-Shabaab, what they're doing in the situation right now in Somalia, it's exactly what was happening in Afghanistan like 4 or 5 years ago. So the trim of the Taliban, the victory of the Taliban in Afghanistan, is inspiring a lot of international jihadist movements all over the world. The Tahrir, if I'm mentioning the name right, the Tahrir al-Sham, I guess, the Al-Shabaab, the Boko Haram in Africa, other groups in the Middle East, and also in our neighborhood, in our region, the Pakistani Taliban. Look what they're doing in Pakistan. If you
The
look at
Haqqanis that you mentioned.
yeah, if you look at the number of attacks in Pakistan before the collapse of Afghanistan, and if you compare that with the ones that had occurred in Pakistan after the collapse of Afghanistan, there is a significant increase in violence in Pakistan. And if you look at Iran, even in Iran, there are a lot of terrorist attacks happening after the collapse of the government in Afghanistan. They returned up the Taliban. So we see that all these Islamist groups, all these jihadist groups, they are being inspired by the Taliban. But if the Taliban can defeat the United States, why can we defeat Iranian government? Like Jundullah would say. So Jundullah is this Muslim Sunni extremist group that claimed credit for the major attack in Kerman weeks ago.
This group you're mentioning is a group that had claimed responsibility for attacks in Iran.
Yeah,
right?
Jaish al-Adal. The new name for that group is Jaish al-Adal, but formerly it was known as Jundullah. So those are the Sunni extremists, Iranian
The larger
militant
point,
group.
Habib, being that the sort of victory of the Taliban and the abandonment of Afghanistan by the Trump administration, then the Biden administration after, has sort of created a sense of faith amongst other types of groups around the world, from Al-Shabaab to Boko Haram in Nigeria, etc., to in Iran, that they too can take power like the Taliban was able to.
Exactly, precisely. And that's what I was saying. Like if you look what's happening, what tactic they're using, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, for instance, or the other Islamist group in the Middle East, in Africa, and also in South Asia, in Pakistan, in our neighbor countries, Iran. They have all been inspired by this so-called victory of the Taliban. That if they can do it, why can't we do it? And that will I don't say something's going to happen tomorrow or something's going to happen in a month, but in the long term, that will have consequences. That will have consequences for the region. That will have consequences for the world. If Afghanistan is forgotten like this and thrown to the wolves like it is right now, that the Taliban, a fanatic group that know nothing about the values as we share as in this modern era. They don't believe in none of those values. What they believe in is extremism, terrorism, and misogyny, depriving women from their rights, depriving people from their civil liberties. There's nobody has the freedom right now to say anything in Afghanistan. If you say anything against the regime, you'll be thrown in jail, and there's nobody to ask. There's nobody to hold them accountable. And there are like tons of people in a lot of activists, female activists, are in prison right now. They've merely thrown people, tortured people by posting something on their social media, like by posting, like tweeting something or posting something on Facebook or making a comment. There's no freedom of speech. There's no freedom of expression. There is no freedom to work. There's no freedom to travel, especially when it comes to women. So it's also helping. At the meantime, they are creating. The Taliban have announced that they will create madrasas, religious schools in every district of Afghanistan, and we have 400 districts in Afghanistan, and they say they'll create 10 religious schools in every district. That would be 4,000 religious schools, and just pretend that just 100 people go to each of these religious schools. They'll be radicalizing like over the course of like 1 decade or 2 decades. They'll be radicalizing tens of millions of Afghans. And who will, like, if the Taliban had a power, they were like merely 40, according to some estimates, they were 40 to 60,000 people. If the US-led NATO alliance and the Afghan government in this app, they couldn't put a fight up to defeat 50,000 to 60,000 people. Then wait for it. When millions of people are radicalized, what they can do to this region and what they can do to this world.
So it's a mess that is very at odds and very different than the realities of Afghan people, of what they want, of their own traditions, and even what Afghanistan was like just a few decades ago. So it's so I think I want to transition to ask you about your own work as a journalist. But I think before we do that, I mean, feel free to share with us, the story of your personal encounters with the Taliban, and so we can learn about that. And then I want to ask you, your own work as a journalist, like what are you working on now, and where do you think Afghanistan can go, and what's the role of the global community in supporting the Afghan people?
So I was one of the few journalists in Afghanistan in 2009 who embedded with the Taliban, and I wanted to tell the stories from a different perspective too. So we had told the story. A lot of people like were telling the story from the perspective of the U.S. coalition forces there at the Afghan security forces, but I wanted to tell the story from the other side. And then I was with a group of 2 other journalists, and then we were meeting this group of Taliban to report, and then the very same group kidnapped us, and they were asking for ransom. So I spent 9 days in their captivity in eastern Afghanistan. That was my first experience with the Taliban, which was horrible and real. And then afterward, during my career as a journalist, I interviewed the Taliban so many times. Like, the Taliban was a complex insurgency. So it wasn't that all the Taliban were trained in Pakistani madrasas. Most of them were trained in Pakistani madrasas, but some of them were just like people who were just upset with the government on the local level. And they had no other way but to pick a gun or support the Taliban or get their support to fight up the injustice that they had faced there. Some people were there in the Taliban because they were like the drug cartel, like in Mexico and these parts of the world. They just made tons of money from narcotics. So for that very reason, they were supporting the Taliban. They showed nothing ideologically. They showed nothing else, just the money, and it was
just business.
Just business. So there were people that were among the Taliban that held grudges against the local authorities. There were people who were there because of the narco business. There were other people who were there because they really believed in jihad. They really believed that the country is invaded by the crusaders or by the infidels, and we have to fight them off. So it was a complex insurgency. But the drivers, the leaders of these insurgencies, they were obviously almost all of them connected to the Pakistani intelligence service. That we know for sure, because they still have businesses there, they own houses, they own properties, like from the Taliban's foreign minister to their interior minister. And we all knew that they were traveling using Pakistani passports. So there's a difference. The leadership of the Taliban, almost all of them were Pakistani proxies. They had very close ties with Pakistanis. Even the Taliban leader who was killed, Mullah Mansour, he was using Pakistani passport traveling around the world, Gulf countries, and he was on the way back from Iran when a U.S. drone targeted him in Pakistan, in Baluchistan. So the leadership of the Taliban, almost all of them were Pakistani proxies, but on the foot soldier level, it was a bit of a complex insurgency. Some people were there because they really believed in jihad. Some people were there, a big chunk of people were there because they were radicalized and brainwashed in the Pakistani madrasas. But some people were there, they just were upset with the government. Somebody they had at the government level, because I'll give you an example in Kunduz, in northern Afghanistan. In northern Afghanistan, when in the post-2001 scenario, a local warlord, he went to a village. He didn't just like those people. They were from a different ethnicity. He went there and he massacred 35 people in that village. So the village people had no other option because the government, the person who committed this crime was part of the government himself. So they had no other option but to go to the government. And then Kunduz became one of the most insecure and volatile province over the years. And it collapsed to the Taliban 2 times, in 2015 and 2016. And it was because of such behavior from warlords who were representing the government in those areas. So it was sort of a very complex insurgency. But overall, the goal of this insurgency was to ask the government, the republic, and take Afghanistan back to the Stone Age as it is doing it right now. Now the Taliban being in power, as I mentioned before, girls, women, they're deprived of their basic rights. They cannot go to work. They cannot travel alone. They cannot study. They can even not go to a park to just take a walk. And when it comes to men are forced to, like in some parts of the country right now, it's prayer time, men are forced to close their stores, close their businesses, and go pray 5 times a day in the mosque. In some parts of the country, they're forced to grow their beards. I like my beard, I grow my beard, but somebody tell me that you have to grow your beard, I wouldn't be fine with that. And also, there's no freedom of expression. There's no freedom of press. Music is not allowed. Music is a big part of the Afghan culture, and it's not allowed. You go to weddings and they're playing Taliban, their own kind of songs without music. So now they're forcing people to play those songs instead of the real music in their weddings too. Apart from that, I hear report that right now a lot of these international jihadists, they're coming back to Afghanistan. They're stationing, Taliban are harboring them, especially in the southeast part of the country where I'm from. There's an inflow of international jihadists. During the past decades, they were all over the world and they had no safe place to stay. Now the Taliban have opened their arms to them and they're welcoming them. And this will have consequences in the future for the region and also for the world.
It's sort of like history repeating itself, right? Some of the terrible decisions made by global powers to sort of engage, come into Afghanistan has created this sort of response with the Taliban taking such power. And I guess I want to ask you about journalism right now, and kind of like Afghanistan as it stands. I imagine you have friends and family there right now. I want to ask you about, your communications with them. How are you able to communicate with them? How is it going for them? I know there are huge food shortage issues as well, and some health issues as well in the country right now. So, given all of this, like, what types of journalism do you think are important? What do you think needs to or can happen in Afghanistan to get back to what Afghan people actually are before all of these terrible actions led to more and more radicalization, and in a way, the possibility of history continuing to repeat itself into the future?
Yeah, as an Afghan, I wouldn't ask for another military intervention from the United States or from any other country. But what I think the United States has the power, the rest of the international community, they have the power to pressure the Taliban and their main sponsor, which is Pakistan. So there's an open dialogue among Afghans, and there's an inclusive administration or inclusive government that represent women, that represent all these different ethnic groups, that represent people from all these different ideologies. What the Taliban have done right now, there's just one group, Pashtun mullahs. I myself, I'm from Pashtun ethnicity, and the Taliban are also Pashtun. But what they've done is, they're just one very small group of Pashtun clergy men that have monopolized the power right now. There's no space for Pashtun who are not mullahs. There's no place for Tajik whatsoever. There's no place for Hazaras. There's no place for other ethnicities in Afghanistan. And there's no place for women in their administration. So what would save Afghanistan? What would help Afghanistan? The Afghan people, and also it will help the region and the world too, that there is pressure on actors that are involved in Afghanistan, on people that are sponsoring and supporting the Taliban. In this case, obviously Pakistan, and then Qatar, and then Saudis, and then a number of other countries, to allow, to pave way for an intra-Afghan dialogue. So there is no more war in Afghanistan. There is no more, in this vicious cycle of violence ends here. Because what happens right now, if the Taliban stays in power the way they are, people are going to get upset. There are already tons of anti-Taliban resistance groups. They will grow stronger and stronger day by day as people get upset with the Taliban. They get fed up with the Taliban. The only way that they will, the only other side is that they either join these anti-Taliban resistance group or they join SKP, the Islamic State Khorasan province, which is even the worst, another version of Islamic radicalization. So what will happen in the next 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years? Either if these resistance groups, they get stronger, there will be a civil war in the country. Because the Taliban have too much equipment right now, and they have too many resources. Like the billions, the equipment and weapons worth billions of dollars led by the United States and Afghanistan, the Taliban are in control of that. So it's not easy to overthrow the Taliban right now. So there will be civil war. And the worst case scenario is that the ISKP, they will get stronger in Afghanistan, and that's even the worst version of the Taliban itself. So if the international community and the regional countries, they want Afghanistan to be a stable country, and there is no, and this extremism doesn't spill over to other countries, regionally and internationally, they should press all actors involved in Afghanistan so they hold an intra-Afghan dialogue, and there's an administration that is acceptable to all Afghans. Nobody is denying that the Taliban does not represent part of Afghanistan. They do not represent, all Afghans are not like the Taliban, but obviously there are some people who are like-minded with the Taliban, who wouldn't like their women, their girls to go to school, or their women to go to work. That's fine, but that's not 100% of Afghans. But there are a lot of Afghans who would want their daughters and their sisters to go to school, who would want people to have their civil liberties and their rights, their individual freedom, and things like that. Those people should be included in the government too. That's the only solution to the Afghan problem. Otherwise, this vicious circle of violence will never end, and we will only witness things worse than the Taliban. The Mujahideen in the 80s, they were not as bad as the Taliban today. And the Islamic State, ISKP, or Daesh, as it is known, they will be worse. They will be worse than the Taliban. That we cannot, like, as the Taliban are worse than the Mujahideen. So the only solution is that all these different parties in Afghanistan, they start a dialogue that is supported by all regional and international power. And they make an arrangement and make a government that is inclusive, that's acceptable to most Afghans, people like me too.
Really important, right? It's how we've learned a lot, right, from just chatting with you today about how the Afghan people and how Afghanistan has been, they've been pawns of kind of globalist or global or international influences, from Pakistan to the United States and the Soviet Union and the whole NATO kind of thing, to the Chinese now, of course, engaging a lot with the Taliban around lithium supplies in the nation, to the Saudis and the Gulf states sort of wanting to kind of influence and kind of bring and influence jihadism in Afghanistan, to even the Islamic State itself. It's been sort of this playing board, like this, like, chess board for others, right? Instead of the possibility of all of these external forces, or at least the ones who really care about the Afghan people. That's the biggest question. Using their leverage to say, hey, everybody in the nation should be part of its future, rather than the status quo.
I have this one theory, and I hope it's not correct. I hope it's just my own thinking. It is not the real scenario on the ground. What I think when I look at the situation right now in Afghanistan and what has happened to in the recent history of Afghanistan, I don't think the international governments they're naive. I don't think they're stupid. What I think with what I make up it is that probably they've come to this conclusion that let the Taliban control Afghanistan, and we'll send all the crazy people, all the religious fanatics that are all around the world, we'll send them all to Afghanistan, and there we'll contain them. So they don't, and we don't care what happened to the people of Afghanistan, what happened to the women there, to the girls there. Obviously, I have my family right now. I have my niece who was supposed to be in 7th grade, but she can't go to school. She stopped at 6th grade because the Taliban do not allow girls to go to school beyond 6th grade. I have more than one nieces there who cannot go to school. And I'm trying to somehow find a way for them to get out of the country so they can continue their education. I have family. I have my uncles are still there. My cousins are still there. I have a large family. Afghans, they say that other people have family trees. Afghans have family forests because we have really big
family forests.
Yeah, we have family forests because we really have big families. So I have a lot of my family members living in Afghanistan, and most of them have lost their jobs. A lot of people who are working at the government agencies, in the government offices, they've lost their jobs. The international community that had a very visible presence in Afghanistan, the UN agencies, they do have some presence right now, but not at the same level that they used to. And all these international NGOs, international companies that were operating in Afghanistan after the collapse, most of them have ceased their operation in the country. And that has caused the effect of that is that millions of people have lost their jobs. There were a lot of people who directly or indirectly employed by the private sector. The private sector had collapsed to a greater extent. The media sector, at one point, tens of thousands of people used to work at the media sector in Afghanistan, and now more than 80% of the media offices have collapsed already. So a lot of journalists have lost their jobs. A lot of people who are working at the with the international organizations in Afghanistan, they've lost their jobs. So this is a lot of people. A lot of people are unemployed right now in the country, and also the Taliban have brought people. For instance, I have a friend at the Ministry of Finance. He was an IT expert there. So he told me that the Taliban brought their people and they made us train their people. And when we trained them, they laid us off. They told us, you shouldn't come anymore to your job. So this is not an isolated case. It has been happening all over the country in all the government agencies. The Taliban are replacing their people with people who worked there for many, many years. And I'm not talking about the leadership level. Obviously, the leadership level are the Taliban from the beginning, but like they're replacing the technical stuff too at these government offices.
On many different levels. Habib, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. It's really, really, I learned so much just today from speaking with you, even though I know some things about the region and about the nation, having had friends from there and been in the region, though not in Badakhshan, not literally in Afghanistan, but in the Tajik side. Yeah, you really helped us and helped me a lot, like understand more about what's actually occurring there, about the incredible history and people, Afghan people, culture, all the range of diversities there, from the natural to the human diversities, and critically the importance of journalists like yourself. And we're going to make sure that people know how they can follow you and specifically Afghan Peace Watch, so we can get a sense of what's really occurring there and how the larger question that drives this podcast, how to care for and repair the damages that have been done in the world, but also kind of get to a new future where we embrace one another, we work with one another, we talk with one another, and we kind of reach a world of greater understanding and compassion and reconciliation. So, I'm really, really appreciative for your time. This is the first of many conversations we're going to be having on all these issues. So I just thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ramesh. This was so great to finally talk to you, and it was an honor. And I'd be happy to have such conversation in the future too. Thank you so much, and a lot of things to Fabi too.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and real pleasure.
Take care. Bye.
Hi, everybody. Your support means the world to us. Our podcast is really focused on creativity, on care, on stories of inspiration, and inspiring characters of all kinds. It's such a wonderful, wonderful way to reach community. This is a labor of love. So the real way we can sustain ourselves is through all of your support. Please rate, ideally 5 stars. Please share this with anyone and everyone you know. And feel free to reach out to us also with suggestions on guests. Reach us at podcastutopias@gmail.com. Thank you, everybody, for your support.